While shoestring budgets can often translate into abysmal box office numbers, sometimes movies defy expectations and rake in hefty sums. Which 70s slasher classic turned $140,000 into a multi-million-dollar franchise? We've got the details on the best low-budget horror movies that killed it at the box office. Inspired by the success of John Carpenter's Halloween, Sean S. Cunningham and Victor Miller concocted a story about a group of teenage camp counselors who are killed one by an unseen killer just weeks before the reopening of an abandoned summer camp. Originally titled A Long Night at Camp Blood, the film that would become Friday the 13th was shot on a budget of only $550,000 and sparked a bidding war over distribution rights between Paramount Pictures, United Artists, and Warner Brothers. Paramount eventually won the rights to the film, nabbing Friday the 13th for $1.5 million. The studio knew they had a hit on their hands and put approximately $500,000 into the movie's advertising budget. They later added an additional $500,000 for a total of roughly $1 million spent on marketing when it started killing it in theaters. Paramount's rather modest investment paid off, as Friday the 13th brought in a whopping $59.8 million at the box office. Adjusted for inflation, the film brought in over $203 million by 2022 standards, making it the highest-grossing horror film of 1980. The massive success at the box office sparked a franchise, with every installment except Jason X making at least 3 times its budget at the box office. Notably, Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, made 10 times its budget. When Friday the 13th was given the remake treatment in 2009, the film was shot on a budget of $19 million, but brought home $92.7 million at the box office, proving that while the franchise as a whole has delivered mixed returns as far as quality, Friday the 13th is a guaranteed way to slash up the box office. Open Water is a sadistically engineered nightmare from the mind and lens of writer-director Chris Kentis. Therein, Susan Watkins and Daniel Kintner end up stranded in the Big Blue Pacific, as the title states, when their scuba diving guide crew raised anchor and departed back to shore without doing a proper head count. Bit by bit, dehydration, hunger, and exposure creep in, and that's before the first shark fin glides into the frame.
Daniel, is that a shark?
Maybe. Or a dolphin.
Shot on digital on an economical budget of $500,000, Open Water made out like a bandit, with a domestic opening of $1,100,943 and a lifetime gross of $55 million. A mouse-quiet survival movie about a long, salty swim became a runaway hit. But why? Roger Ebert credits it to a simple, universal fear of abandonment. The acclaimed critic wrote in the Chicago Sun-Times, "I'm not afraid of water and don't spend much time thinking about sharks, but the prospect of being lost, of being forgotten about, awakens emotions from deep in childhood. To be left behind stirs such anger and hopelessness." Further fueling the film's popularity was its loose connection to true events. The story is based on the 1998 disappearance of American couple Tom and Eileen Lonergan, whose guide crew had not noticed their absence until 2 days after they failed to return to the dive boat in the Coral Sea. Like so many horror movies based in reality, Open Water offers a cosmic middle finger in lieu of a happy ending, which was just what the post-9/11 crowd ordered. Get Out, Jordan Peele's directorial debut, was made with a modest budget of $4.5 million. It starred then-unknown actor Daniel Kaluuya, offered an unflinching depiction of racism, and didn't rely on gore or expensive visual effects to attract audiences or generate scares. Against the odds, the psychological horror thriller would go on to earn over $255 million worldwide. Much of the film's success is due to good old-fashioned storytelling, as it draws on the realistic horrors and relatable anxieties associated with meeting your partner's parents and being the only black person in a room full of white people. The film's use of casual and systemic racism as the main villain during what would become an era fraught with racial tension was also particularly timely. While the original ending had Chris being arrested and imprisoned after defending himself against Rose and her family, Peele decided to rewrite it after several high-profile police brutality cases sparked meaningful conversation on the pervasive nature of racism in modern society. In the new ending, Chris and the audience would experience a knowing moment of despair when the police car arrives, only to breathe a sigh of relief when his friend Rod steps out of the car to rescue him. According to Peele, this ending allowed for the originally intended reaction to be preserved, while still allowing for a happier ending, relatively speaking.
I mean, I told you not to go in that house.
In addition to good storytelling and timeliness, the massive critical and financial success of Get Out can also be attributed to the fact that its concept of the sunken place became a viral sensation, sparking memes and becoming part of the cultural lexicon as a popular term for silence and complacency in the face of systemic oppression. Despite being technically low budget, the film's solid execution and boldness in forcing audiences to acknowledge the reality of racism definitely paid off in a big way. Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 classic Psycho is a low-budget success by design. The master of suspense was rumored to be growing bored with the lack of challenge his bigger-budget projects presented when he purchased the rights to the novel that would be the basis for Psycho. In the documentary The Making of Psycho, the film's screenwriter Joseph Stefano says that Hitchcock had a clear vision for a low-budget hit when he pitched the movie, one he presented with a signature Hitchcockian diss. The filmmaker cited some other recent black and white hits, then said, "How would it be if somebody good did one of these low-budget movies?" Hitch relished a challenge, and Psycho was just that. According to an IndieWire retrospective, he made the movie for around $800,000. He cut costs by filming in black and white with a television crew. The film's lack of color was a striking choice that also made practical effects easier, as when Hitchcock famously used chocolate syrup to create fake blood in the film's famous shower scene. His gamble paid off. Psycho made at least $32 million at the box office, though its historic run is often cited as raking in upwards of $50 million. With adjustments for inflation, Psycho grossed around $400 million during its theatrical run. This turned out to be a lucrative payoff for the director. When he initially pitched the project to Paramount, executives weren't entirely convinced the lurid tale would pay dividends. Hitchcock was so confident in his project that he chose to forego his typical salary in favor of 60% of the film's gross.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Hitch returned to bigger budget projects after Psycho, but his detour into shoestring filmmaking is forever immortalized in a masterpiece that was able to terrify audiences for little more than the cost of a jar of chocolate syrup. Every now and then, a low-budget, under-the-radar horror pick starts generating the type of buzz that results in smashing success. In 2005, Neil Marshall was known, if he was known at all really, as the director behind the horror comedy Dog Soldiers. Marshall's follow-up was The Descent, the story of a group of female cave divers who inadvertently disturb the den of terrifying subterranean monsters. The film looks plenty slick, despite being filmed in a very limited location, a dark, damp, claustrophobic cave created entirely on a set at Pinewood Studios. Coupled with the fact that the entire cast was pretty unknown, the budget was relatively low, under $5 million to be precise. The Descent first opened in the UK in 2005. A year later, it made its way to the Sundance Film Festival, where it earned rave reviews and plenty of hype. By the end of 2006, The Descent was making plenty of Best Movies of the Year lists. All told, it hauled in $57.1 million against a budget of £3.5 million, which is approximately $4,700,000 American dollars. It seems impossible nowadays that the horror classic A Nightmare on Elm Street could be described as low budget, but that's exactly what it was back when it was released in 1984.
Who are you?
The film started off with a $700,000 budget, which quickly boiled over to $1.1 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's approximately $2.68 million in today's world, which would most definitely still be considered low budget. What could have been just another dead-end horror gag turned out to be a bona fide phenomenon, and Wes Craven's horrific high school tale ended up grossing a whopping $51 million globally. Adjusted, that number would be over $137 million in 2022. The film was such a roaring success that it ended up pulling New Line Cinema out of the financial straits they've been in since the company was founded in 1967. They had renegotiated their debts in 1980, but were still trying to keep their heads above water when A Nightmare on Elm Street made the studio's dreams a reality. When talking about micro-budget horror films that shined bright at the box office, it goes without saying that Unfriended is one of them. Ingeniously executed, it is one of the first major screen-life horror films, and plays out entirely on a MacBook screen. It tells the story of digital possession caused by cyberbullying, where 6 high school students are joined by an unknown, mysterious user during a Skype session. When the sinister entity is revealed to be their classmate Laura Barnes, who died by suicide a year earlier, the teens begin dying one by one. They can't hide, they can't log off, and they're forced to make harrowing confessions and watch as the spirit takes over their Facebook accounts, posting incriminating footage that ties them to her death. The film had its world premiere at the Fantasia International Film Festival in 2014 before Universal Pictures released it theatrically a year later. Against its humble $1 million budget, Unfriended was highly successful at the box office and grossed $62 million worldwide. Its $15.8 million opening weekend was the biggest debut for an original horror movie since The Conjuring in 2013, and its success is credited to its originality and creative marketing campaigns.
He came home.
John Carpenter is an undisputed master of horror. If the man has a single crowning achievement, it was most likely 1978's Halloween, the slasher classic that introduced the world to Michael Myers and spawned a franchise that is still going strong to this day. At the time, the slasher genre as we know it today wasn't really a thing, though movies like Psycho and Black Christmas were arguably 2 of the first in what would become the subgenre. Slasher wasn't a term at the time, and that needs to be understood when looking at what Carpenter did when he was approached to make a movie about a killer stalking babysitters. It wasn't a template for success, especially when you consider that it was made on a budget of $325,000. Thanks to some compelling marketing that leaned heavily on the title and left things pretty mysterious, Halloween went on to become one of the most profitable horror movies in history. To date, it has earned just over $70 million at the box office, which is more than 230 times its original budget. Those kind of returns simply don't happen in Hollywood. James Wan's 2013 film The Conjuring was a massive hit, taking in $317 million and using the reportedly true stories of Ed and Lorraine Warren to develop a franchise around memorable supernatural villains. That film interestingly begins with the introduction of a possessed doll named Annabelle, a disturbing figure that made such an impression, despite not being the film's antagonist, that it got its own spin-off merely a year later.
My God, John.
That's the one, right?
Yes.
2014's Annabelle focuses on the doll itself via its connection to a vicious Satanist attack intended to conjure a powerful demon. According to an interview with director John Leonetti, the film was intended as part of a strategy to spin new projects out of successful films and their existing fan bases, making an extraordinary $257 million in box office returns on a mere $6 million budget. The strategy worked. The movie cemented the Conjuring universe films as top performers and kept the eerie doll in the spotlight. There's low-budget filmmaking, and then there's The Evil Dead. The original Cabin in the Woods horror film was made completely independently, with writer and director Sam Raimi begging anyone he could to finance his film. He ended up raising $375,000, about $1.3 million with inflation, and headed to rural Tennessee to film their low-budget gore fest.
And the best part is we get it so cheap.
Yeah, why are we getting it so cheap?
Well, I don't know. Might be in real bad shape.
The Evil Dead was like a filmmaking boot camp for many of its young crew, including the 20-year-old Raimi and one of his oldest pals, star Bruce Campbell. They endured a grueling shoot in the Tennessee wilderness that eventually forced crew members to leave one by one. In the end, it was only Raimi and Campbell working late into the night on their demented dream.
Ash, I don't want to die. You're not going to leave me, are you, Ash?
Thankfully, it was all worth it, as The Evil Dead went on to gross $2.4 million at the box office, which is about $8 million with inflation. That means The Evil Dead made back 6 times its budget just at the box office. And that's not accounting for its eventual home video release. Cult classics like The Evil Dead do even better on video, and this film was no different. Fans who couldn't see it in theaters because of its NC-17 rating sought it out on VHS. In 1987, it spawned a sequel, Evil Dead 2. From there, Raimi created an entire franchise that has grossed more than $150 million worldwide. The film's frenetic energy, unusual camera techniques, and gross-out gore made it an all-time midnight movie classic. Lee Winnell knows his way around a low-budget horror success story as not only the screenwriter for the first two Saw films, but also as the writer and director of 2020's The Invisible Man. Shot on a modest budget of $7 million for low-budget horror juggernaut Blumhouse Productions, the modern adaptation of the classic horror film exceeded all expectations and took home $143.1 million. It was the top of the box office during its opening weekend and enjoyed a successful 3 weeks in theaters until COVID-19 struck, and theaters around the globe shut down. In the subsequent weeks, The Invisible Man continued to play almost exclusively at drive-in theaters and reclaimed the top spot at the box office during its 16th weekend, when physical media and VOD rentals were already available. The same week that the United States box office reported a $0 opening weekend in March of 2020, the on-demand streaming service Fandango Now reported their biggest weekend in history with The Invisible Man at the top of the most watched list, with a $19.99 rental price tag. While VOD numbers are not reported, we do know that The Invisible Man brought home over $13 million in domestic sales of DVD and Blu-ray, proving that audiences really wanted to see The Invisible Man. It's not an exaggeration to say that no one was expecting One Cut of the Dead to come crashing into the horror space like a feral cannibal. Upon first glance, the movie seems like a routine micro-budget zombie picture. Made for 3 million yen, which is about $25,000 in Yankee currency, the story surrounds a production team and cast who are assigned to make a single-take zombie movie for live TV. It's a tall order for filmmakers with the limited resources these ones have. They don't even have money for an air compressor, and theatrical blood must be manually blown through a tube for splatter effects. But this team has the power of cinema on its side, and they pour their blood, sweat, and tears into a scrappy movie that would surely have zombie cinema pioneer George A. Romero nodding in approval. The first half hour of One Cut of the Dead treads the same well-trodden path of the usual zombie outbreak tropes with quiet gusto. In fact, it does it so well that, before the turn, one might shut off the movie and miss out on the incredible narrative pivot that occurs, taking a ho-hum zombie story template and transforming it into a heartfelt, goofy love letter to movies and filmmaking. The payoff was immense. Audiences fell head over heels for the movie to the tune of a worldwide gross of $27.5 million. The movie went on to become the 7th highest grossing film in Japan in 2018 and is currently enjoying extended praise on underrated horror streaming service Shudder. When Saw premiered in 2004, director James Wan was an unknown name in the film industry. After writing the script with his friend and fellow filmmaker Lee Winnell, Saw was produced for just $1.2 million. Despite this tiny budget, which was small even by horror movie standards, Saw went on to become a massive financial success, grossing over $103 million globally. The success and subsequent popularity of the Saw franchise can likely be attributed to the fact that it offered a refreshing take on scary movies. So much so that it is often credited with revolutionizing the horror genre as a whole.
I want to play a game.
One element that sets Saw apart from other horror movies of the era is the fact that it deviated from the popular teen slasher formula. In fact, the main characters aren't teenagers at all, and there's no campiness or fan service to offset the film's unfiltered violence. Additionally, the movie's villain wasn't a supernatural phantom or a mindless murderer. Instead, Saw introduced the world to Jigsaw, a sadistic game master and serial killer who uses his victims' own survival instincts and morality against them. The moral dilemma aspect worked alongside the extreme body horror present throughout the film to evoke a visceral response that made Saw unforgettable to viewers and critics alike. Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez's faux documentary all but reinvented the horror genre overnight when it debuted in 1999. The Blair Witch Project popularized the found footage format and ushered in an era of dread-based less-is-more horror that would dominate the 21st century. Along the way, it became one of the best box office success stories of all time. Before post-production and marketing costs, which bumped the film's cost up to as much as $500,000, the project was originally shot for a minuscule budget of around $35,000. The Blair Witch Project made massive box office returns after a successful viral marketing campaign convinced viewers it might contain real footage of actual missing people. The movie grossed nearly $250 million worldwide, benefiting from word of mouth among viewers who bought into the urban legend at its center. The film's success paid for its initial budget several hundred times over.
I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.
Unlike some films on this list, the shoestring elements of the Blair Witch Project are easy to see. The film's grueling shoot largely took place in the wilderness with handheld cameras. The filmmakers were so cost-conscious, they told Roger Ebert they even returned one of the cameras to Circuit City for a refund after production wrapped. The shoot itself was also inexpensive. It took only 8 days, with a detailed outline in place of a script. At the start of 1930, with the Great Depression in full swing, Universal Studios was going broke, having lost $2.2 million at a time when that was a dangerously huge amount of money for a studio to lose. Then, the monsters came to the rescue. First, there was Dracula in 1931, with Bela Lugosi, which earned the studio a $700,000 profit. When studios see numbers like that, they immediately start thinking of ways to replicate the success. And sure enough, Carl Laemmle Jr., Universal's head of production, immediately announced that more monster movies would be on the way. That same year, the studio unleashed Frankenstein, adapted from the novel by Mary Shelley. These days, it's easy to overlook how scary Frankenstein seemed to audiences in 1931. Horror grew more graphic and more extreme in the decades to come, desensitizing its core audience in the process. But back in '31, the movie-going public had never seen anything quite like Frankenstein. And when Boris Karloff first stepped onto the screen, buried in the now iconic makeup created by Jack Pierce, audiences flipped, in a good way. They couldn't get enough of it.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Shot on a small budget of $262,007, Frankenstein initially earned the studio $1.4 million. Universal kept the pick playing in theaters over the years, and by 1953, Frankenstein had jolted to $12 million at the box office. Years ago, writer and director James DeMonaco and his wife were almost killed one night by a drunk driver in Brooklyn, New York. After the incident, she told him in the heat of the moment that she wished she could just have one free murder a year, and thus the basis for The Purge was born. DeMonaco, who was perhaps best known prior to the franchise as the writer of the 2005 Assault on Precinct 13 remake, used his partner's comment to create the 2013 dystopian horror film set on the one night a year during which all crime, including murder, is legal for a 12-hour period in the US. Ethan Hawke stars as a stand-up father who has his family hunkered down for Purge night when things go south, and a pack of wild yet eerily polite purgers make their home a target after a man they attempted to kill takes shelter in the family's home.
If you don't deliver him by the aforementioned time, we'll release the beast on him and on you.
The low-budget gem made do with the $3 million budget, but their box office return was one for the books. The film grossed nearly $65 million domestically and just under $25 million internationally, which left them with a worldwide gross of over $89 million. There are few movies that can boast the type of success that Paranormal Activity had, which was a true lightning-in-a-bottle moment for the horror genre. The only thing that even comes close is the Blair Witch Project. In any event, director Oren Paley's 2007 movie, which was released theatrically in 2009, will go down in history as perhaps the best investment by a studio ever. The film originally screened at festivals and, using a lean found footage format, cost a mere $15,000 to make. In acquiring the film, the plan was to remake it with a larger budget. But producer Jason Blum, founder of Blumhouse Productions, opted to hold a test screening of the original before pressing forward, and that changed everything. People were so terrified they left the theater. So instead, $200,000 was invested to film a new ending. With that, horror history was made. Paranormal Activity became a pop culture phenomenon, taking in an astounding $194 million worldwide, all from a $215,000 investment. It went viral in the truest sense of the word. People talked about it with their friends, the marketing leaned heavily into just how terrifyingly realistic the movie was, and the intrigue was enough to get people out to theaters in droves. And it just kept happening week after week. While the math gets tricky, it is widely considered to be the most profitable movie ever made when looking at return on investment. To date, 7 movies have been produced within the franchise, 6 of which were released theatrically, earning a grand total of $890 million worldwide. When considering the combined budgets hardly eclipsed $30 million, this is a downright cash cow of legendary proportions. Tobe Hooper's 1974 low-budget nightmare, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was an exercise in tenacity for its cast and crew. The film was made for a minuscule budget of around $140,000, which is just under $800,000 with inflation. The low budget meant that some corners had to be cut. For example, the cast was forced to wear the same dirty, bloody clothes each day because there wasn't enough of a budget for multiples of the same costumes. Performers were injured doing some of the more difficult scenes, special effects didn't work, and by the end of shooting, everyone was pretty frustrated with Hooper. The good news was that all the suffering translated directly to the screen. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a tense and brutal film that feels like it's a little too real, in part because it was. The low budget forced the cast and crew to get creative and to really dig in, which in turn made the movie's horror all the more authentic. Audiences and critics were stunned by the gritty, nail-biting film, and it has gone on to spawn an entire franchise with sequels and remakes. The latest sequel, simply titled Texas Chainsaw Massacre, premiered on Netflix in February 2022. If the Texas Chainsaw Massacre had been made with a big budget and glossy special effects, it might not have shocked audiences in the same way. Sometimes a low budget is actually a blessing in disguise. After the unbelievable success of The Sixth Sense, director M. Night Shyamalan was poised to become the next Spielberg, an impossible feat for anyone to accomplish and almost guaranteeing that audiences would be disappointed with anything short of perfection. His subsequent films, Unbreakable, Signs, and The Village, performed well at the box office. But The Lady in the Water was a financial failure and started a trend of critical flops that continued with The Happening, The Last Airbender, and After Earth.
You're wrong!
The director, who was once believed to be the next big thing, was now viewed as nothing more than a twist-ending punchline and struggled to find financing for future projects. Then, 2 years after the failure of After Earth, Shyamalan took out a $5 million loan on his Pennsylvania estate to finance his 2015 found-footage horror film, The Visit. Told through the camera recordings of Becca, a young aspiring director, she and her younger brother Tyler are sent by their mother to visit their grandparents at their remote Pennsylvania farm for a trip. They soon discover that their grandparents are not what they seem, and that their lives are in serious danger.
I get you.
Low-budget horror mavens Blumhouse Productions co-produced the Shyamalan film, and thanks to their first-look distribution deal with Universal Pictures, Shyamalan's $5 million financial risk paid off in a huge way, as The Visit brought home nearly $100 million worldwide. Shyamalan kept a list of Hollywood executives who had refused to distribute The Visit, noting in 2018 that most had since been fired.